Welcome, everyone, to the Friday, November 1st, 2024 election preview episode of On Iowa Politics. This week, there's a whole lot going on with voting in Iowa these days. We'll talk to Todd about newspaper endorsements. And of course, we give our hottest takes and big predictions for the November 5th election. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. We've got a big show, a big news event coming up, so we got the full roster ready for you. We start with Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Erin.
Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is with us. Hello, Sarah.
Greetings, Erin.
We have Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal here. Hello, Jared.
Erin, given the utter disrespect that was shown last week, this week I had to bring some delicious candy corn to eat. So I'm just going to be enjoying those all throughout the pod.
I appreciate you putting your claims where your mouth is and providing us visual evidence. Well done. All right, and lastly, Gazette columnist Todd Dorman is with us. Hello, Todd.
Hello, Erin.
All right, let's start this week with those newspaper endorsements. This past week, the Washington Post announced that it will no longer endorse presidential candidates. It's a last-second break with tradition that goes back decades. I'm speaking sort of for myself here, but I think I can speak fairly comfortably for journalism writ large here. That the two aspects of this were particularly concerning. One, that the decision was announced so late in the election cycle, and two, that it gave off the appearance that the directive from Washington Post and Amazon owner Jeff Bezos made the call to protect his personal bottom line. Bezos's companies have multiple government contracts, and the announcement just happened to come on a day when one of Bezos's company leaders met with Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. I should note here that in an op-ed published in the Post shortly after this all caught fire, Bezos denied that his decision had anything to do with his checkbook and said the timing of the announcement and that meeting with Trump was purely coincidental. I'll leave that to independent minds to decide whether they buy that. Todd, as the Gazette's opinion page editor, and as someone who I know has been involved in numerous endorsements of all kinds over the time, I'm curious to get your reaction to the Post decision.
Well, I mean, in a way, it's surprising just because, the Post is seen as sort of a major journalistic institution in the country. They've got the "Democracy Dies in Darkness" motto, and
which got thrown back in their face pretty heavily.
I knew that was going to happen. I mean, although I was surprised, they've really only been endorsing since the 70s.
Yeah,
I
around the Nixon era, right? Yeah.
Yeah, as I wrote for today, the Gazette's been endorsing since 1884, so 140 years of good and bad calls. But yeah, people don't ever remember that we endorsed.
Did Chester A. Arthur get that endorsement in 1884?
Is he a Republican?
Yes.
Well, he probably did. And no, actually, that year it was we had endorsed James G. Blaine to beat Grover Cleveland. And so that was the election where they found out that Grover Cleveland had fathered a child with a widow out of wedlock and refused to marry her. And Blaine had his problems. And it was, at the time, they called it the dirtiest campaign in American history, but we know better today. But I think Bezos tried to sort of dress it up as, I did this because he feels endorsements are part of the reason why newspapers have lost public trust. Although, as I say, we've been doing it since 1884, so it's been a long, very long, slow loss of credibility. But the pressure is on every newspaper, and especially newspapers with sort of a living, breathing editorial section, to not make conservatives angry. And because we used to make money off of ads, now we make money off of subscriptions. So when people get mad and cancel their subscriptions, it's not a good thing. Once a week, I have someone tell me that I've written something and they're canceling like their subscription after 40 years or something like that. I never go to check to see if that's actually happening. But so there's a lot of pressure. And I think, Bezos may be feeling that pressure, especially as you suggested with his government contracts and all of those things. And then everybody started, or a lot of people started boycotting the paper and canceling their
Mhm.
subscriptions. They're not hurting Jeff Bezos. They're basically
Right.
denying the news operation of revenue it needs to do the reporting that, needs to be done. If you want to hurt Bezos, cancel your Amazon Prime subscription. I think would probably be a
Whoa,
little.
whoa, whoa, whoa!
Yeah,
Come
I
on now.
know.
Let's
I
let's.
I didn't do it either. You know, I had I had to order some stuff.
Yeah, I've made that point too, Todd, to folks who, and I've had family and friends asking me about it, and including the people who are canceling their subscriptions. And that's exactly what I said. I'm not telling people not to be upset or frustrated or whatever it may be, but if you think that the $6 for 6 months digital subscription special that you got into WAPO on is gonna hurt Jeff Bezos's or get his attention in any meaningful way. I think I have some bad news for you.
Well, and it's the same as what I get from the other side of the spectrum. They dislike something I wrote or my, body of work, and just to sort of protest that, they're willing to chuck all of the other work that reporters do and that the sports department does and all the things that go into a newspaper and all the information that they get from it just to spite me, which I think is short-sighted. I mean, they're basically just missing out on a bunch of stuff to try to make me stop doing what I'm doing, and it won't work. No, it won't work. So stop it. But it's just these are the time, this is the situation journalism is in, and I think people were right to be upset with the Washington Post. I guess if they canceled their subscriptions, it was because they couldn't figure out what else to do
Right.
to send a message. Yeah, our presidential endorsement comes out tomorrow. It's kind of late, but I never feel like we're influencing anyone's votes anyway. We're just kind of putting down our markers so that, I'm looking at this 1884 stuff 140 years from now. I hope somebody looks and says, "Oh, wow, they did stand against the Emperor Trump before the Great Wars or whatever happens next." So, yeah, so we're gonna keep doing it as long as we can. We don't have as much manpower as we used to, but we still like to weigh in.
And by the way, you're saying tomorrow as we record here on Thursday afternoon, so I assume that means Friday's paper that endorsement is in, Todd.
Yeah, it's a presidential endorsement and a couple of congressional
Okay, so depending on when
endorsements.
you listen to this, that popped Friday. So check that out and then shoot any one of us an email and let us know you're threatening to cancel your subscription over it. We'll be happy to talk you through that and hopefully talk you out of it.
I had someone already email me to complain, and they haven't even seen it yet. So
And obviously, I have a problem with the timing and everything, and I'm very suspect about Jeff Bezos's explanations to this. But am I alone in not necessarily having a problem with the broader trend of newspapers moving away from doing presidential endorsements?
No, I was going to say something similar, and I'd be curious to get Todd's reaction to this too, from his very unique perspective on this. Which, by the way, every once in a while I get a comment. Maybe this is a good episode too to hopefully remind, and hopefully the right folks are listening to this one. If it's not been clear in the past, I say it every week in the intros. Todd is a columnist. The rest of us all are reporters. We don't always get that delineation
No,
appreciated.
everything Todd
So-
says is endorsed by everyone else.
exactly. But no, I was gonna say something similar, Jared, that like I think there's a healthy discussion to be had there about whether that's useful and appropriate and whatever. And I'd be willing to entertain genuine and thoughtful arguments on either side of that. And I remind folks, as so many of us got upset about this Washington Post thing, that it's not about that. It has nothing to do with whether the Post should or should not be endorsing a candidate. I could give a flip whether, honestly, if they want to, great. If they don't want to, great. It's like I said, and like Jared reinforced there, is that the timing of it is especially rotten, and the apparent conflicts of interest. Again, you all decide whether you want to take Mr. Bezos on his word there. Todd, what's your thought on all this?
My simple explanation is basically we weigh in on lots of public policy issues. We weigh in on bills and actions by the legislature, and it seems kind of weird to weigh in on all that, but then not say anything about who's going to actually be making the policy. So, I mean, it used to be a much better process. Everybody used to be willing to come in and meet us face to face, and Republicans didn't diss us, and it was a nice chance to get to know candidates and to ask them questions and see how they perform. But a lot of that's just been thrown out the window now because people don't want to do it. So we send out questionnaires and give them a chance to write columns, and unbelievably, some of them don't even write columns. It's like, here's 400 words you can have to say whatever you want. Nope. The Gazette they'll do something to it. I don't know I don't have time to do something to it, but yeah. And the double problem with, this idea that that Bezos is trying to please Trump is that, I mean, this is Trump. You've got a president that's like, he wants to take broadcasting permission away from like CBS and NBC, and he wanted to take 60 Minutes off the air, and he wants to fix libel laws so that you can sue newspapers for doing what he calls hit pieces, those sort of things. So you've already got uh, a former president, a Republican candidate who's really hostile to sort of the underpinnings of a free press, and then you go ahead and sort of let him dictate whether you endorse. I mean, I don't think that's a good precedent.
The only thing I would add is that I think with how much information is out there now about presidential campaigns, I understand why newspapers have moved away from those as far as endorsements go. But I do still think and value like endorsements all up and down the ballot otherwise. I think that there is definitely still a place in particular for newspapers to do those, because people do not know a lot about some of those races up and down the ballot, and they still trust newspapers when it comes to some of those endorsements, even if they don't trust papers when it comes to presidential endorsements.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good point, Jared. All right, man. Honestly, we could spend a whole podcast on this topic. It was pretty fascinating, and from my standpoint, anyways, a little bit enraging to see unfold. And I'm glad we have Todd on to appreciate his perspective on this. He's got a perspective that the rest of us can't provide. Again, because Todd is an opinion writer, and the rest of us are news journalists. Thank you for writing that down and remembering for future use.
And that's why podcast listeners may notice that when I say something that's supposed to be funny and it's just dead silent, that's because they're not laughing at me, because they are so responsible that they're just not having it.
Yeah, that's why. Yep.
Or if they try to tack on a joke, they wind up in the Washington Post themselves.
Yes.
Moving on, this week there were multiple stories about voting and registration issues. So let's tackle those separately. You can't tell a voting issue in Iowa without a scorecard these days. Tom, you reported on a story about some bulk challenges to voter registration lists, which is actually not new. We heard about this a little bit in 2022 as well, and now it's happening again. But the unique thing this time is there might have been some erroneous enforcement by a few county auditors. So tell us a little more about what happened there, Todd or Tom. Sorry.
Not a problem. So apparently some Iowa voters were improperly removed from registration rolls by county election officials after challenges to their registration status were filed too close to the election. That's according to Iowa Secretary of State Paul Pate. He mentioned that on Wednesday during a news conference with reporters. The Secretary of State's office emailed county auditors and county attorneys last week about challenges to Iowa voters' registrations that were occurring across the state and reminding them that state and federal laws, with some exceptions, prevent them from removing voters from their voting list shortly before the election. So this email went out on October 23rd from the Secretary of State's office. It says that the office was alerted by Vote Shield. It's a vendor used by the Secretary of State's office to monitor voter registration data for anomalies. So this vendor alerted the Secretary of State's office, and through that, the Secretary of State's office was able to see that a number of counties were improperly processing challenge-related cancellations. Pate, again, talking to reporters on Wednesday at a news conference, said that county auditors are to refrain from removing voters from registration lists during a 90-day quiet period before a federal election, again, with some exceptions. So, except for removals based on the death of a voter or other specified exceptions that are included in federal law. State law provides another layer of protection with a 70-day quiet period for state elections. And so he told reporters that county auditors need to put some of those voters, or those folks, as he called it, back on the voter rolls. He said that, to the best of his knowledge, most, if not all, of those counties have gone back and done that and reinstated these eligible voters that were removed from the voter lists, and went on to say that his office is going to be following back up on that to make sure that, in fact, that did happen. This was kind of an issue that was brought to the forefront by the American Civil Liberties Union and its Iowa affiliate. It sent letters on Friday to all 99 Iowa county auditors, urging them to reinstate any voters that they may have improperly removed. The letter references complaints from voters about challenges from private parties asking for their voter registration cancellation, and it talks about voters in Johnson, Muscatine, and Pottawatomie counties. It should be noted that the request for mass removal of Iowa voters from the voter registration list is separate from Pate's directive issued last week to county auditors to have poll workers challenge more than 2,000 registered voters based on their citizenship. Those are separate issues. What happened here is you had, for example, in Pottawatomie County, I was able to talk to county election officials there. A county resident challenged the registration of 605 voters in that western Iowa county that includes Council Bluffs. The list appeared to include people who had moved out of state but had not notified the auditor's office, as indicated by, I guess, national change of address information supplied by the U.S. Postal Service. Auditor said that his office received the challenge 71 days before the election. And so because it was received outside of that 70-day quiet period that's specified in state law, felt that his office could go ahead and process those challenges. And so letters were sent to those addresses on the county's voter rolls, as well as to the forwarding address provided by the challenger, notifying voters that their registration was being challenged. And then of the 605 letters that were sent out, 179 responded. Only 2 people asked to keep their registration, stating that they had moved back and re-registered at their new residence. The auditor said that many of the mail notices bounced back as undeliverable, which to them indicated that, okay, these are voters that have moved out of the state and no longer reside in Iowa and thus should be removed from the voter rolls. So the 422 who did not respond were removed from the rolls following a September hearing for any voter whose registration was being challenged. According to the county auditor, no one showed up to that hearing. He went on to say that he was unaware of the 90-day federal rule, and other election officials that we talked to also mentioned this confusion between the 90-day federal quiet period versus the 70-day state law. So he said that it was his understanding that the state's directive was to mean that if a challenge comes outside of the 70-day window specified in state law, that auditors could proceed with processing voter cancellations. You know, we heard from, as I mentioned, the Secretary of State on Wednesday saying that election officials need to abide by both the federal and state law, and that, you know, the federal law essentially takes precedence or supersedes the state law because it has to do with federal elections. So anytime there's a federal election, you know, there's that 90-day period. And then again, the state kind of has an added layer of protection specific just to state elections in Iowa, right? So if it's a state election and there's no federal you know, issue or candidate right on the ballot, if it's not a federal election, then you defer to the state law, to the 70-day rule.
And the bottom line here, Tom, again, and I think you mentioned this for sure, that it sounds like most, if not all, of the names were put back on the registration list. And then I guess it also merits pointing out that even if there are some cases where they weren't, Iowa has same day voter registration. So if you were to show up at the polls on election day, you will still be able to vote.
Yes, that's correct. And it should also be pointed out that these deadlines are in place to make sure that if someone's registration is challenged, that they have enough time to appeal it before election day.
Right.
And, you know, specifically with regard to the federal law, you know, the intent behind that really is to, again, make sure that if any processing errors, bureaucratic errors, if any mistakes were made, as you know, states kind of go through and clean up their voter rolls, that, you know, it's not done so close to the election that there's not time to correct that if there are any errors or any mistakes that are made as they're doing kind of that routine general list maintenance to clean up the rolls.
Yep. All right. And the other one that yours truly has been covering, as Tom alluded to, Iowa Secretary of State Paul Pate's order for poll workers to challenge the ballots of more than 2,000 Iowans whose citizenship status is unclear to the Secretary of State's office. We talked a little bit about this on last week's podcast also, but wanted to just touch on it again real quick this week because the questions have continued. And then this week, as we sit here on Thursday, just earlier Thursday, the ACLU of Iowa and LULAC, on behalf of 4 Iowa residents and U.S. citizens, filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging Pate's order. So we're headed to the courts over this one. Todd, I'm going to come back to you for your best legal prediction here. I'm wondering if you have any sense on how the courts will see this. I mean, it's interesting to me because on one side, there's a very clear hurdle here that has been put in front of Iowans who are 100% eligible voters. They have to file a provisional. They'll be asked to file a provisional ballot just because they're on that list, but they very well may be full U.S. citizens. That's just the outdated information that the Secretary of State's office has. And so you would think that the lawsuit's got a good chance for that reason. But on the other hand, I've seen courts defer to the state when, you know, that they have an interest in protecting, you know, elections and ensuring that only legal votes are cast. So what do you have any thoughts on this, Todd, and which way this one's going to go?
Yeah, I wondered first how fast the courts could
there's that too.
Work.
Yeah.
I mean, election day is Tuesday, and
right.
So that only gives them 2 more business days to
Yeah.
look at this. I don't know whether they can do it or not. I suppose in election cases they can speed up. Part of this that I can't understand is why the Secretary of State's office doesn't have uh, more regular access to this data so that this didn't have to be 2,000 people, about a little over a week before the election, because I mean that it's hard to sort of pivot to that. And I think I agree with some of the people that are saying that some voters on that list will just not vote.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just either turn around and leave or they'll be disgusted. And then you got to have, the precinct workers who have to handle this. I mean, who knows what kind of backlash they're going to get when they tell someone that they're not able to vote a standard ballot and have to do a provisional.
Right.
And I mean, provisional, you got what, 5, 7 days or something like that to then go and prove that you're a citizen so that they'll count it.
Right. Until the following Monday. Yep.
It's so yeah, like you say, it's a big hurdle for, admittedly a very small group of voters, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure it played out the way it was necessary. I think that this should have been something that was checked, periodically. But, there again, this is also the flip side of this is that this is happening in several red states. It's part of a effort to, contend that there are, lots of non-citizens voting and, throw that on with all the fraud that they allege every election cycle now. So it'll just be another handy argument to make if Trump ends up losing or any of those things. They can just say, well, and on top of that,
Mm-hmm.
thousands of non-citizens are eligible to vote. So anyway, it's kind of a mess, and it would be nice if the courts could do something, but they may just end up, as you suggest, deferring to the Secretary of State.
So, as you mentioned, it is concerning that the Secretary of State's office, allegedly is not being able to get information from the federal government to, check the citizenship status of these, suspected non-citizen voters. The Secretary of State's office did put out a statement today saying that apparently the Des Moines field office of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has reviewed all 2,176 names provided to county auditors for poll workers to challenge. But again, the allegation or accusation from the Secretary of State is that the federal office in Washington, D.C. is, withholding results of the review. But I mean, also concerning here, though, is the timing of this and the fact that apparently the Secretary of State was aware of the flaws in that DOT database that they were relying on, and was aware that this was outdated information on which they were relying. We were provided emails from State Representative Adam Zabner, a Democrat from Iowa City, who actually kind of brought this issue to the Secretary of State's attention starting back in the fall of 2022 about a flaw in the Iowa electronic voter registration system. He provided us with emails that show that back in September of 2022, he had alerted the Secretary of State's office that he was concerned that the online system may not work for new citizens who obtained their driver's licenses before becoming citizens. He had been assisting a North Liberty resident who had been recently naturalized, but was unable to register to vote through an online form on the Department of Transportation website. And because the new citizen had an Iowa-issued driver's license, he was directed to this voter registration portal on the DOT website. But when they filled out the online form, message popped up that said that he was ineligible to register to vote online, and that records on file with the Iowa Department of Transportation indicated that he did not meet the requirements to register to vote. Adam Zabner, the Iowa City lawmaker, explained the flaw in the online system and provided him with a physical voter registration form that he was able then to deliver to the county auditor. But brought up this issue with the Secretary of State's office and shared additional emails documenting that the Secretary of State's office acknowledged the problem and worked to add a new warning to the DOT's voter registration portal. The website now alerts naturalized citizens who are issued an Iowa driver's license or a non-operator ID prior to their naturalization ceremony to update their citizenship status with the DOT in order to utilize the online voter registration portal. So given the fact that the Secretary of State's office was aware of this issue and aware of kind of the flaws in that database and how outdated it was, it's concerning then why they would rely on that to produce this list and why they would put that out, I guess, so close to the election.
Yeah, which is one of the main questions that Secretary of State's office and Secretary of State Paul Pate has been fielding over the last couple of days as this is unrolled. And he, when he was asked about that at a press conference this week, he kind of referred to the process of trying to get this list that you mentioned from the federal government, not being able to get it, and so then going to these records instead. But that still doesn't quite totally answer why wasn't that being done way earlier, years ago, to your point about the emails, Tom, so that you got to this point of frustration months out from an election, not literal days out from an election. So we'll see. It'll be interesting. I assume we'll have a hearing very, very soon here at the federal courthouse in Des Moines, and as Todd alluded to, the time frame is tight, so we'll see what, if anything, happens on this, and probably have something to talk about on next week's podcast. All right, man, I was really hoping to basically just have this last chunk as the whole podcast, but we had such interesting stuff going on this week. I wanted to get that in. Now let's get on to the big ticket item. I don't know if anybody here knows, but there's an election on Tuesday. So let's just open this thing up and go around the horn. What's everybody watching for? What are you most interested in? Any bold predictions? We love those, of course. Any crippling fears? I'd be glad to hear about those. Air that. Any and all thoughts are welcome here. And I'm not even going to pick whoever wants to rush to the mic first and talk about what their Tuesday is going to look like. Go ahead.
I'm interested to see how just turnout in general in Iowa goes. That'll definitely, and I guess the obvious answer, right, is like the congressional districts, like the first and third congressional districts. Those are supposed to be really close, and seeing who was able to mobilize their party to come out to vote and convince enough swing voters to vote for them. I think it'll be tight, but I definitely couldn't tell you who's going to win in either the first or the third districts. So I'll be looking to see how close those elections are. Certainly if for some reason it's not very close, that will also be interesting. I'll also be interested to see what turnout looks like. So in 2020, there was high use of absentee ballots, obviously because of the pandemic, and Secretary of State sent out ballot requests to every registered voter. So there was quite a bit more absentee voting than election day voting in 2020 in Iowa. And so I'll be interested to see if absentee voting is still high in this election because of the shortened window for absentee voting. And obviously the pandemic isn't going on quite as much anymore. And yeah, so that's what I'll be watching for. But it also, I went to the polls and talked to a few voters in Scott County a week ago, and a couple of Republicans told me that this was the first election they'd ever voted early before. So it seems like there is Republican messaging to like turn out early and bank your vote, is what I hear a lot. So I'll be interested to see if there is any changes in turnout for absentee voting with those, two different factors.
Yeah, are they just? I think you're right. Republicans are voting early and more regularly this cycle. Now the question is are those just election day voters who are deciding to vote early, or are they getting new voters? That's the we won't
Yeah.
know we won't know that until the election day, but that's a big question there. All right, Sarah's on the board. Who's next?
One of the more interesting ones, you're getting a county level race this time, not even a state
Ooh,
house
I
race
love it.
or a state Senate race. So in Woodbury County, we've got a battle between longtime auditor Pat Gill, who's been the auditor since 1996. At this point, has to be one of the longest serving Democrats anywhere in the state at any level. And he is running for another term against his deputy auditor, Michelle Scaff, which is a fun interoffice battle going on there. So I will be very curious to see if he's able to hold on, because obviously Western Iowa has not been very friendly to the Democrats, well, for a while now, and especially even in more recent years. It's pretty much everyone who's a Democrat has gotten wiped out at all levels of government. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to hang on with that longevity and everything.
Wow,
Um,
sorry, real quick on that, Jared. That is fascinating. I'm ashamed to admit I didn't know about this. So that is, and I've spoken to Pat Gill a number of times over the years for
mhm.
stories when you talk to county auditors about whatever issue it may be. So that's really really interesting. And does it seem? I mean, I guess just because of the demographics of the area, Jared, that it seems like that this is a genuinely competitive
Yeah,
race despite his
it's gonna
tenure.
be it's gonna be close. He had a close race last time. I forgot to look back at what the
Okay.
margins were last time, but he definitely has been putting out all his ads at the right time, because those have flooded like websites and stuff, like our local news websites in the past couple weeks. So
Huh.
that's obviously the time in local races to be doing that for people who are just starting to pay attention. But a lot of yard signs for his opponent, Michelle Scaff, around here. And I make fun of those in presidential elections, but in like lower level races, I think those do actually matter somewhat. So,
Because people aren't necessarily familiar with those names, right?
yeah,
At the more local level. So those yard signs actually help boost that name ID. Sorry, Jared. Go ahead.
yep. And then I mentioned last week, I'm going to be keeping tabs on the fourth congressional race just to see what the margins are there. I'm also curious to see if JD Schulten's going to be getting another term, because, as I mentioned again, Western Iowa not so friendly to Democrats. He's got a challenger. And then, not in our neck of the woods, but down in Council Bluffs, I'm very curious to see what happens for Josh Turek in his race, because last
Mm-hmm.
time, if anyone remembers, he won by 6 votes in his 2022 race. So I'm very curious to see if like that one ends up being just as dramatic again.
Yep. I had forgotten it was that close. I knew it was close, and I knew it was one that folks watching the state house races were keeping an eye on that one. So that's a
Yeah,
good
something
one.
with the close races in Iowa and coming down to 6 votes that
that's
or what
the magic
was
number.
was it 6 or 13 for Miller Makes? It was
It
6,
was no,
right?
it was
Yeah,
six.
okay,
Yep.
good. Yep. So
Yep.
something with Iowa and 6 vote margins.
I think it was 13 at one point. Tom, does that sound right? But the final margin was six.
Yes, yep, that's right. Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth there, a lot of fluctuations in the numbers, but the final tally was a margin of 6 votes.
I have one more that's like hyper local, but it's kind of been an amusing thing. The Sergeant Bluff school district has had a bond issue 6 times in a row be rejected. Like they've brought it 6 different times in elections, and it's gotten voted down every single time. So I will be curious to see if lucky number 7 is finally the one for them.
Wow. Stick to itiveness.
All right, so I guess I'm the last one. I mean, obviously, as we mentioned, all eyes are going to be on Iowa's first and third congressional districts. I think, especially so for the first district, I think that is probably a true toss-up. I think that race is probably closer than in the third district between Zeknon and Lennon. So it's going to be interesting this time around to see um, to see how Christina Bohannon's campaign and her message focusing on abortion and reproductive rights, how much that's really going to motivate voters, and how, you know, how much that's really going to get people to the polls, how much of this enthusiasm with the change at the top of the ticket, with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket and her running mate, Tim Walz, since Biden decided to bow out, how much of that enthusiasm is going to translate down ballot, how much of kind of the anger and uproar over Iowa's 6-week abortion ban, how much is that going to play in voters' minds as they're heading to the polls compared to economic issues and immigration issues that Marionette Miller Meeks and Republicans have really been harping on, are those economic issues of, high grocery costs and concerns again about illegal immigration into the United States. Is that going to be a more motivating factor for voters? We'll see. Man, I'm trying to think, and Erin, maybe you know better than I. I haven't looked at the most recent voter registration numbers, but I believe that Republicans have a voter registration advantage in the first district by what is it, like 20,000?
I don't remember the margin off the top of my head. I'll look that up. But you are correct. It's a small advantage.
It's a small, right?
Yep.
But Republicans still have a voter registration advantage in the first district, and so it's really going to come down to, I think, those no party voters and which way do they swing, and what are the issues that are going to swing them one way or the other. Are they going to be motivated or persuaded by the arguments coming out from Christina Bohannon and again, this intense kind of focus on abortion and reproductive rights, or are they going to gravitate more toward Republicans and the messaging of, lowering taxes, securing the border, and trying to bring down the cost of inflation by, cutting government spending and reducing the size of government, et cetera. And then just lastly, I don't know that anything is going to really shift dramatically in terms of the balance of power in the state legislature. I don't see Republicans losing their majority in the House or the Senate. However, it is going to be interesting to see if Democrats can pick up some of these seats, particularly in the Des Moines suburbs and the greater Des Moines area. Can they eat into those expanded majorities that Republicans have built up over the last couple election cycles? I think going back to 2016, how much is there going to be a pushback by maybe some of those voters in these suburban areas to some of the things that the legislature has done recently, including the 6-week abortion ban, the changes to the area education agencies, and the impacts that we're starting to see from the education savings accounts, the taxpayer funded savings accounts that families can use to send their children to private school, which starting next year becomes universal, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. We're in year 2. Next year, it becomes universal.
It's not a tiny number, but it's not a giant number in the grand scheme. In the first district, it's a 20,000 vote advantage. That's out of 400,000 plus active voters. So it's close enough. And to Tom's point, in the Register Iowa poll, when they did the generic ballot question, that was the only district that the voters favored the Democratic candidate instead of the Republican candidates. So, and I'm with you, Tom, on the state house thing. That's maybe one of the other, like we all said, Iowa 1 and 3 are probably the most interesting things. I'm curious to see those numbers at the state house, and it's just interesting because there are seats that Democrats think they can flip, but they're also on defense in a couple of spots too. So it's not out of the realm of possibility to imagine a scenario where both of them kind of flip 1 or 2 and we end up with a net very little change. But that's also why you go into an election looking at it that way, and then maybe there's a movement of some kind that we didn't see coming, and those all go one way or the other. That's why we always say that the only poll that counts is on election day. Todd, did we leave any crumbs for you there?
Oh, not so much. I guess I see this election as kind of a life check for the Democratic Party. It's a chance to put a mirror under its nose and see if it's still breathing. What success looks like, if they could grab one of those congressional seats, take a few seats in the House, maybe get lucky enough to end the supermajority in the Senate, and just sort of, make gains to the point where it's a psychological boost. I think that would pass for a victory for them, and they clearly need one.
Yeah, and we talked to Rita Hart a little bit about that on Iowa Press. Like at some point, this becomes a concern, I would imagine, for the party for recruiting candidates in the future, because look, Democrats have been raising alarms about what Republicans have been doing at the state house for years, and yet Republicans keep winning elections. And for all the things that Tom just listed, and that didn't even include the books and schools policy change and the transgender policy changes. I mean, if you're an Iowa Democrat at the state house level right now, and you aren't able to move the needle in an election, I don't know when you convince yourself that will ever happen. So that kind of, I think, underlines the point you're trying to make there, Todd, about the stakes for Iowa Democrats here. And then obviously for Iowa Republicans, they're looking to see if the voters are still going to sign off on the agenda as they have been.
I also, in Scott County, which has been pretty blue for a while, there are more Republicans now than there are, there are more Republicans than there were like the previous cycles. There are some more flipped seats in Scott County. And so some of the state Republicans have kind of campaigned on, well, don't you want somebody in the majority who's representing your area? Like, I can get something done. I have the ear of the legislative leaders, and we can work as a team. They're listening to Scott County concerns because we have representation with the leaders of the chambers. So that's also an argument that like state lawmakers that are running for reelection are making here in Scott County, that I think is kind of interesting. That if you're a Democrat and you keep reducing your size of influence, it's difficult for people to go to their Democratic representatives and say, hey, I have this problem, I need this done, and then it's going to be a little more challenging to get something done if you don't have any influence like that.
That's it. That's interesting. That's very interesting to hear that some of the local candidates are making that argument. I've heard that. I can't remember who it was. A federal delegation candidate. I want to say it was maybe even Chuck Grassley making that kind of argument at the federal level. It's good to send me back. I think. Well, I guess it's slightly different now that I remember it, because I think it was Grassley saying, "I've got tenure. I've been around. I'm in leadership positions. It's good to send me back because I can vouch for Iowa." Trying to go beyond the partisan arguments there. That's fascinating, Sarah. Thanks for that.
Important election day question for everyone. Is anyone participating in the time-honored tradition of election day pizza in the office or elsewhere?
So this is a little sad, but a little fun, hopefully. Since I haven't been in a newsroom on election night in a literal dozen years now. But I always make sure that I have pizza at home on election night. So I still have my election night pizza. It's unfortunately not shared with my colleagues, but I am participating in spirit. Do they do election night pizza back? I don't even know the answer to this, Tom. I think Gazette, do they do pizza on election night?
I don't know.
You were on board by 2022, right?
Yeah, but I'm like you. I was out covering candidates. Yeah. I was out at an election night, watch parties. So I don't know. I think so.
All right.
Yeah, they do. They have to.
See, I'm just sitting on my at the office, so I can enjoy all the election day pizza I want.
Yeah, well, and to Tom's point too, that's the other thing. Like, I've done it all. I've been at a party HQ on election night. I've been at a candidate HQ. I've been at home, just kind of orchestrating and funneling. This week or this year, I will be at a candidate HQ, so it doesn't really matter. I'll have election lunch pizza. Does the Times? I know the the Telegraph Herald, did election night pizza. I remember that vividly. Does the Times do it, Sarah?
Yeah, I think we have in the past, but yeah, like you said, usually we're out doing things,
Yeah.
covering things.
Yep.
Like municipal elections or like I don't think we did that for the primary, or at least I wasn't in the office for the primary
Yeah.
election, but I don't know. I'll have to put a bug in their ears, see if they have plans to do that.
And then meantime, and I know this because I've sat on both sides of this fence, the sports department complains because every Friday night football is like an election night and we never get pizza. All right. Well, we'll be back again next week full of election night pizza. Just getting over our heartburn, just getting caught up on some sleep, and we'll be ready to talk about those election results on next week's podcast. So make sure you come back and join us for that, and we'll see all those questions we just asked. We'll have all the answers to those and more. That'll do it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. We appreciate you tuning in. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You can also find the podcast each week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. And now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox, you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. Lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, Todd Dorman, and our producer Bailey.cichon, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone. Be good, and make sure you get out and vote.